On August the 2nd, President Barack Obama declared America's combat mission in Iraq has reached its end. He told a conference of disabled veterans of America in Atlanta, Georgia, that more troops will be coming home at the end of August and, quote, as promised and on schedule, next month we will change our military mission from combat to supporting and training Iraqi security forces. He said this is in line with the Status of Forces Agreement and with his own promises. And he said he's able to fulfill those promises in part because, I quote again, violence in Iraq continues to be near the lowest it has been in years. Now, that last statement has caused a degree of surprise because on the very same day that Obama was speaking, the Associated Press reported that July was the deadliest month in Iraq in more than 2 years. Now, the U.S. military top brass rapidly and vehemently denied that. They issued lower figures of their own, and they insisted that Iraq is now stable and able to determine its own future after America's departure. But Iraq's now entering its 5th month without a government. Obama's promise of withdrawal may not be all that it seems, and the assessment of Iraq's stability is still a very confusing one. To start this episode of Inside Iraq, then, we're going to go live to Baghdad and our reporter Rawia Rage. What accounts for the discrepancy in these numbers? How do they do the counting, and why are the end results so different?
Well, I have to say, Taimur, that even sources we've spoken to have given us very different estimates. While not as high as the 535 estimate cited in other news media, it was not as low as the 222 numbers cited by the U.S. military. A security source tells Al Jazeera that the number of those killed in July was 391 people. Meanwhile, the health ministry spokeswoman tells us the number is actually 335 people killed. Now, what does discrepancy shows or does is that it once again brings to attention the difficult administrative conditions in this country. It has long been a very difficult process maintaining an accurate casualty count in Iraq. People are buried very quickly here in line with culture and tradition, and it has been very difficult for those who want to maintain a proper record of casualties or write or record the history of this war, if you will. And that's because the criteria by which the various ministries involved, that being the health ministry, the defense ministry, and the interior ministry, the criteria by which they tabulate casualties is very different. At one point, for example, while one entity will include victims of explosions, another entity would exclude victims of targeted assassinations. So therefore, a very murky picture. But perhaps what's really important here is the fact that there's that many people killed. So even with the U.S. military estimate of 222 people killed, that is still a large number of people dying in a country that's about to lose the support and the military might and backing of Washington.
Exactly, and the absolute numbers perhaps play a second fiddle role to what is actually the bigger question, as you put it. I mean, President Obama is trying to tell us, as he did on August the 2nd, that Iraq violence is at its lowest in years, but clearly there are a lot of people who don't think that's the case. What are the political dimensions to this dispute?
Well, of course, there is the argument that the U.S. military is perhaps trying to paint a rosy picture, a positive image as it draws down from Iraq, perhaps to show that there is progress in this conflict. Of course, it is the centerpiece of the American narrative that violence is down. But we have to remember that what is happening here is the White House is actually taking a huge gamble that as the U.S. forces draw down from Iraq, as they pull out from Iraq, they're taking a gamble that Iraq will not disintegrate, that we're not going to see the kind of vicious sectarian violence that we once saw here. But to be fair, U.S. military generals are not exactly saying that the security levels are where they should be or that the situation is ideal. But what they're saying is they're looking at the situation from a more holistic perspective in terms of trends rather than upticks of violence, as they like to call it. And as far as they're concerned, the overall trend is positive. And there's no denying that the levels of violence violence we're seeing in Iraq today are nowhere compared to the bleak days of 2007 and 2006. But simply put, July was a bad month in Iraq, Taimur. And that's because we've seen the kind of brazen attacks here that we haven't seen in a while. So whether 200 people were killed or 200 people were killed or 500 people were killed, we've seen brazen attacks targeting security forces, Shia pilgrims, the pro-government anti-Al-Qaeda, Sunni militia, the Awakening Council, namely the brazen attack in Azamiya in which security forces, an Iraqi checkpoint was attacked by gunmen, and Al-Qaeda even momentarily raised its black flag. So a very serious sign here and very grave concerns about the fragility of the security situation here in Iraq. And of course, the frustration and the anger here is that 5 months after the inconclusive elections in March, there's still no functioning government here. There's still no new government, no new prime minister named, and the politicians are bickering. And perhaps this political impasse is an opportunity or a rife opportunity for the fighters and insurgents.
All right, Rabia Rageh in Baghdad, thank you. Well, to discuss this latest disagreement over casualty figures and its implications, I'm joined from London by Saad al-Muttalibi, a member of the State of Law Coalition and a political advisor to the Ministry of Dialogue and Reconciliation. From Washington, D.C. by John Berkman, a Republican strategist. And also from London by Sabah al-Mukhtar, a president of the Arab Lawyers Association. Gentlemen, all of you, thank you for being with us and welcome to the programme. Let me begin with you, Saad al-Muttalibi, and ask your opinion on this particular issue of numbers. It's not the first time we've seen disagreements over numbers. UNICEF reported before the war that 500,000 Iraqi children had died as a consequence of sanctions. The Lancet reported that the casualty figures could be more than 600,000 people, and now we've got this. Is this anything new, and should we really care that there is a disagreement over casualties?
To start with, I think there could be a discrepancy in numbers where there are two sets of figures here being evaluated or counted. There are the civilian casualties, and there are the civilian plus the military casualty. If we add those together, I think we will get a number that differs from that of what the United States have declared, or the United States Army have declared. I think the states are looking at the military casualty, or they are only looking at the civilian casualties, as the military are supposed to be on line of fire and they're doing their part of the job. Let me put that then to Sabah al-Mukhtar and ask you, can you enlighten us as to how the Iraqi government compiles its numbers and what exactly do they consist of?
Well, I think the Iraqi government figures come from the body count. They receive people in hospitals, so they know the numbers. The Americans are making assumptions. They are trying to show that the situation in Iraq is so good that they can pull out, that it doesn't have any problem in Iraq. Iraq is moving forward. This is what the Americans is trying to say. But in fact, this is totally an immoral discussion, because at the end of the day, having destroyed the living, now they are desecrating the dead. They are now playing with the figures as if people don't matter, and as if it is 500 or 1,000, it makes a difference.
All right,
as if a man or a person has no value.
John Berkman, obviously you disagree with that.
Oh my goodness, I think that belongs on Saturday Night Live. He should be referred to NBC. He can appear on a comedy show. I mean, look, Eddie, numbers are always changed and played with in wartime. I mean, yes, DOD in the United States, the Defense Department changes the numbers. I mean, there's not a country at war anywhere in the world that doesn't do that. I mean, I admit openly and I concede openly that the United States government has played with those numbers for purposes of mobilizing domestic political support in the United States. Now, the broader question is, why are we talking about this? Why are we having this discussion at all?
Well,
we're having
John,
this discussion
before you start asking the questions, if I may interrupt you and ask one myself, and that is, you may be absolutely right. The numbers are not really necessarily worth talking about. What is perhaps more significant is President Obama's contention that we're seeing the lowest violence in years. Now, there's not really much to support that contention, is there?
Well, it's improved. I mean, it's very hard to make these kinds of judgments. I mean, it all feeds into. I mean, where I was going, I think that's the same question I was going to ask, and that is Iraq better off than it was 7 years ago? And I think the question is overwhelmingly yes. I mean, what I don't understand is this European mindset that somehow that somehow we need Saddam in power, and that was the way to go, and that was better for the Iraqi people. I mean, I have always seen this as a kind of racist view, that the Europeans they feel that the only way to run a country like that is with a strong man.
I'm not quite sure.
I mean, they have the same view of.
John, I'm not quite sure how Europeans come into this, but let me go back to Mr. al-Muttalibi and ask you. I mean, at the end of the day, should we really be considering is Iraq better off or not? Or should we be actually considering what's going to happen once President Obama and this apparently dubious claim of less violence decides that he can walk away? I mean, I'm sure he won't have a banner up saying mission accomplished, but at the end of the day, if he does walk away, what are we left with?
Well, this is the important question. This is the question. Is Iraq better today than it was before, let's say, several years, 3 or 4 years? It's definitely better. The decline in violence is over 90%. Life in Baghdad is much better. I live in Baghdad, unlike the Mr. Salah al-Mukhtar, who lives in London, and I don't know last time he went to Baghdad. I've seen life, I've seen how life improved in Baghdad. I've seen how the standard of living has improved in Baghdad. I've seen how the people of Iraq are now actively participating in choosing their government and actively criticizing the politicians for the delay they're causing in the forming the new government.
I'm sure Mr. al-Mukhtar will disagree with that, but let me disagree with you for 1 second, because you're talking about active participation in government. My question to you is, what government? There isn't a government, and even the people who are in parliament don't seem to want to actively participate in government.
Yeah, if you let me finish, that was I was saying. The people have an active role in criticizing the politicians who are delaying the formation of the government. And that view of freedom that we are enjoying now in Iraq, this we do not value by numbers or by the amount of casualties we're giving. We're all ready to give these casualties to have that freedom, to have the ability to stand up to any politician and say, "Carry on, do your job."
Well, let me allow Mr. al-Mukhtar a response to this. The idea that a notional ability to criticize a non-existent government somehow represents progress. Tell me about that.
Well, Mr. Saad is living in the green zone, so of course he feels.
No, I don't live in the green zone. I live in Arasat. No, I don't live in the green zone. Okay, I live in Arasat. Please, get this right. I live in Karada.
All of you live in the green zone. All of you live in the green zone. All of you work in the green zone. And when you go out, you have 30 people protecting you from the people. So the idea that somehow the life of people does not matter because you can speak and because you have 20 newspapers or some other
this discussion,
satellite stations where people cannot even go to their work without being bombed or killed, and the figures shows that, and this is what we're discussing.
All right, let's get John Berkman's take on that. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Isn't anything better than living under a brutal dictator?
No,
Isn't any kind of government better than Saddam's government?
Let me stop you there and not ask that question, John, if I may, because that's not really the question at issue here. Let me put a question to you.
But
when General Ray Odierno says that when the Americans pull out, they may well have to send a peacekeeping force to keep the peace in Kurdistan, you've got to ask yourself whether anything has been achieved.
Well, yeah, I think that's right, and I don't support Barack Obama in wanting to leave as early as he wants to leave. I agree with you. I agree with where you're going entirely. But if you want to talk about progress, you say the question about Saddam isn't the question. You have to measure it against where Iraq was in 2003. I don't understand why you don't want to do that. I mean, the Americans America deposed a terrible dictator. You have to give the United States credit for what's happened.
All right. Well,
I think the world.
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you
America an apology.
I'll tell you why there's a degree of skepticism being raised, not necessarily by me, by a lot of people. And I'll put this to Mr. al-Muttalibi. and that is the question of comparing it now to what it was 7 or 8 years ago is not necessarily the right one, because the question is what's going to happen when they leave. Now, if there's trouble in Kurdistan, if, as we have seen and as our reporter has reported, the attacks that we've seen in July represent evidence that the insurgency or some kind of violent tendency remains fairly strong, then once the combat operations, however President Obama wants to phrase it, decides to move on, those forces of anarchy, of violence remain and will once again reassert themselves. Do you not have that fear?
You see, with the military disengagement now taking place in Iraq, we will see, or we're hoping there will be a political engagement by the free world with Iraq, helping Iraq past this very critical time. I must agree with your guest in the States that we cannot compare between Saddam and today, because it's two different worlds altogether. Now, if we go back to your question, sir, yes, there are elements of unrest, there are elements of differences between how the Kurds see the circumstances in Iraq and how the Arab side see the political situation with their northern colleagues. There are differences, there are problems, but we are all resorting to resolving these differences through dialogue. If you have noticed in the last few months, we don't view a political violence between competing political parties. There is an open dialogue, and the dialogue is taking place. The insurgency have gone down, I mean, tremendously. As you know, I am in charge of reconciliation, and I deal with insurgents every day in my job.
Let me take a stab.
Well, hold on. Let me give al-Mukhtar another comment here, because he hasn't had too much of a say. Go ahead.
The reconciliation is taking place between the people who are actually in power. You know, when you have al-Hakim and al-Maliki and Ayad al-Lawi having a reconciliation, this is an absolute abuse of the terminology. Reconciliation is between people who differ. Those people have all come with the Americans. They all have the same agenda. They all want the Americans to stay. They all will leave before the Americans leave. So the idea that somehow you have reconciliation there. As far as comparing figures, if you compare the figures, there went 570 or 80 people killed a month before 2003. There went the daily bombing. There went the problems with the education, with the water, with the electricity, with the health services. You didn't have the 2.5 million people. So if at the end of the day this is the achievement of the Americans, then I think the Americans really are either naive or being silly.
Let me move it on a minute. John, I want to put you a slightly different question here, and that is President Obama's position on this. Now, he told the veterans on August the 2nd that combat operations will cease, and he tried to paint this as keeping to the status of the agreements that he'd made, that President Bush had made, and with his own promises. But in fact, it's not the same thing at all, is it? He's simply saying the troops will stay, but they won't be taking part in any violence. He's a little bit of sleight of hand going on here, isn't there?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I'm the opposition party in the United States, as you know. I mean, Obama, in some sense, the left wing of the Democratic Party believes he's recreated the British Empire in the Mideast. He has more troops over there than Bush could have ever imagined, if you include Afghanistan. So, in some sense, he feels he has to just take a chance on Iraq working out, and I think that's a good bet, and concentrate everything on Afghanistan. Obama, one of the things I think your European audience, your global audience needs to understand is he faces a real risk of a primary in the United States within his own party. He may not even be the nominee next time.
All right, so, I mean,
so he has a left fringe he's got to deal with.
The only point I'm trying to nail down here is that there's a little bit of confusion here, and the American troops aren't, in fact, pulling out at the end of August, are they? Saad al-Muttalibi, what exactly is going to be the role of those remaining tens of thousands of U.S. forces under the existing structure?
The 35,000 troops remaining, they will be logistic supports, they will give us air cover, they will provide us with trainees, they will provide us with different aspects of non-combat facilities.
Yes, but you talk about air cover. If the Iraqi government starts coming under some serious fire from violent tendencies, are you not going to see the government there asking those existing forces there to come in and help?
No. No, categorically no.
Do you believe that, Mr. al-Mukhtar?
No, no, that is not correct, because the treaty they have, which with the Americans, it empowers the Americans to intervene, to protect the regime,
I can simplify.
to safeguard it, to take the position of the government, to protect it, and to intervene militarily. And that makes this agreement different from any other agreement that the United States of America have signed with any country. That's why it is not a sofa as the Americans
I can
claim.
simplify and give you a somewhat simplified perspective. I think Obama will not be able to adhere to the timetables he laid out. And I think the United States will continue probably for the next 3 or 4 years to have a fairly strong overall military role in Iraq. I think that's of necessity. So I wouldn't parse this too much. I don't think the Americans will be able to withdraw to the extent that Mr. Obama is telling you.
So, Mr. al-Muttalibi,
actually, Obama has never delivered on any of his promises. Obama has never delivered on any of his promises, whether domestic or international.
Let me throw it on, though, to Mr. Muttalibi, because if, as Jack Bergman says, the forces are going to stay and they will probably play a role that none of us is willing to admit at this particular moment. What exactly does it say about your claims that this is a situation that is better than it was before, or indeed has made any kind of significant achievement? Because without a government, without a real sense that Iraq is running its own future, what exactly do you have in the country?
Well, Jack is trying to score a point against the Democrats, so he's right in what he is saying politically. But what I'm saying, that what you have presented, the picture you have presented, is not entirely true, and it's more false than true. The Americans will pull out, the last soldier will pull out by end of 2011. We will not tolerate the presence of fighting or American soldiers or any international soldiers on our soil by 2011. This is a matter complete and finished. By the way, to Mr. al-Mukhtar, the Americans can intervene now only by the request of the Iraqi government. If the Iraqi government requests an assistance by the American forces, then they're entitled to support us. Otherwise, they are in their camps, and whoever been in Baghdad know that they are sitting in their camps.
You have to understand the claim.
Let Mr. al-Mukhtar answer that point.
Which of course the Iraqi government will ask, because we all remember when Allawi said that he ordered the Americans to get rid of al-Qaeda from Fallujah and from Najaf. We always know this, and this was the same situation during the monarchy when they asked the British to intervene. So there is nothing new in this. History is repeating itself.
All right, very quickly, all three of you gentlemen, we're right at the end. I just want to ask you one simple question, and I want you to make it fast, please. And I'll begin with you, John Bergman. We've heard from our reporter that the kind of attacks that we've seen in Iraq recently have been increasingly brazen. And people are believing that once the Americans leave, that there will be more trouble. Now, do you agree with that?
No, I think it will work out. And just one quick point, in terms of progress, you really have, there's great risk going forward, but that doesn't mean that massive progress hasn't been made.
Okay, final word to Mr. al-Muttalibi. Okay, let's concede that massive progress has been made. We haven't got time to define that. But as far as the future is concerned, can Iraq survive without a government and in the face of what, as I say, seem to be increasingly brazen attacks?
No, definitely the Iraq needs a government, and that is the biggest challenge we are facing now, is to form a government as soon as possible with inclusion to all political parties, and they have to be active participants in the political game, and to make sure that Iraq is ruled by its citizens and everybody is contributing to rebuilding Iraq.
And Mr. al-Mukhtar, come September the 1st and the US is no longer engaging in combat, what happens next?
Iraqis never forgive occupiers or traitors. They will both pay the price.
Gentlemen, I appreciate your participation to all of you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Inside Iraq.
Thank you, sir.
Well, if you'd like to watch this or other shows again, go online, visit our website at aljazeera.net/English. But we've reached the end of this particular show. Join me again next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Bye-bye.